Here's my little modular grid, and now I'm ready to put the content on my page. If I go to my Word document, all I have to do is copy and then paste this into a text box in Photoshop. And go back to here. And then you can take your text tool, and I can make a text box that I can just fit into my column, which is a nice way to approach it. And then all I have to do is do my Command V or Control V, and I've got my paragraph of type in there. It will pick up whatever I had been working with in my character window before. So now I'm going to go and set this in something legible. Then if I need more room, I can simply pull down my text box and it populates. So text boxes are a really good way to be able to manage a column of type. And then I can use both my character window, and if I go get my paragraph window, then that's all I need to set a nice column of type. First thing you have to do is essentially decide the layout that you want your paragraphs to be. Do you want them left aligned, center aligned, which is a little distracting, maybe good for headlines, but not so much for a column of text, or right aligned? Depending on your layout, any of these could possibly work. There's also the option to justify your text, where you have the margins on both the left and the right are even, and then what happens is in the middle of your column you have kind of a variation of white space. So justified columns are a little trickier to set because you really have to pay attention to your white space on the line. And if you get too much white space between words, you get what we call rivers. And that's when the white space moves across a couple of lines of text and you start getting these kind of distracting white spaces. Usually with your setting your text column, it's a negotiation between the width of the column, the size of your typeface, which I have here should be 12, and then the amount of horizontal tracking or horizontal spacing. So these are all located in your character window. And if I highlight this and I make it a little smaller, then the smaller my text, the more white space I actually need. So anything like -20, you might think that -20, oh, that looks pretty good. You know, at least my lines look really good now. But you can see that there's not that much room around each letter. And that's far too tight, that setting. So you never track. You might track a headline if it's really big. You might get negative tracking. But you never set a column of text with negative tracking. You always want to start with at least 20. So let's do 25. That seems to be the default, but I can customize that. I could put in 20 if I wanted to, right? And then depending on the size of your type and the width of your columns, I can, you know, if I was really wanting to have this justified, and it's not too bad actually. I reduced the size of the typeface, and now that's not a bad looking column of type. Okay, there's no real weird white spaces emerging, and it looks pretty consistent. The biggest thing you have to be aware of with your columns of type is you don't want anything distracting. You want to make it really easy to read. So that comes with negotiating your column widths, as I said, the size of your type, and this horizontal tracking. The other thing that you want to do is pay attention to this little part of your character window. It's called the leading, and it's the amount of white space between your lines. So if I increase it to 27, you can see there's a lot of white space. So the rule of thumb is typically you set your leading a minimum of 4 points larger than your typeface. And I was working with 10-point typeface, so that would be about 14. And I could even set it a little more, which I think it actually needs it. The smaller the typeface, the more white space you need. So there's 18 and there's 20. And if I kind of zoom out, you can see that that's a that looks like a nice column of text. It's got enough space between the letters and the words and between the lines, and that looks pretty good. If you do left alignment with your paragraph, then you have to be careful that your right margin, this is referred to as the rag, R-A-G. Your rag has to be kind of rhythmical and not have any weird white spaces playing there. So I've got a little bit of a weird white space right here. And then this starts looking a little strange down here. So you sometimes have to go in and select a line of type and then just increase that line. And I would also maybe pick these 3 lines of text down here, and I would move the tracking a little bit so that it has a nice rhythm, and then that feels like it's broken up. You don't want to ever have a word by itself at the end of your column or at the end of a paragraph. So that's a problem. So what I would do is I would maybe select the last 4 lines of text, and I could either work to increase that spacing so I get 2 words, or I would decrease the spacing so Sentry gets bumped up on the other lines. So let's try that. And what does it take for me to... It takes quite a bit. All of a sudden I'm into negative territory again with my horizontal tracking. So I'm actually going to just move it up to, where is it, about 65? There it is, 85. How does that look? Sometimes you have to click off and look at your text, and you can see that there's a little bit more white space in the last couple of lines, but that's preferable to having a word all by itself at the bottom of your paragraph or your column. So you have to kind of just negotiate that. But those are some of the principles behind good typography. So now I can start filling in my page with the different parts. I have a headline that I'm going to turn on. And let's talk about the headline for a minute. It's a good idea to make the headline definitely large so it jumps off the page. It's a good rule of thumb to make your headline very visible and to work with contrasting typefaces. So in this example, I've used Arial, and I want to direct your attention to one really important factor about a good typeface. A good typeface will have a variety of typefaces within that family. So on my system, I've got Arial, and there are 4 different typefaces within Arial: regular, italic, bold, italic. I also have Arial Black, and that's just got one weight or one style in it. Then I have Arial Narrow, and that has 4 different styles or families in it. And the last one, Arial, is Arial Rounded. So between these 4 Arial typefaces, I have 10 different styles. And within those styles, there's different weights. And that's a really nice thing to use. So in my layout, I've used Arial for all of my typefaces, but I used the bold, the black, I used the narrow, and then I used the regular in my column. It's fairly harmonious because there is some variety, which is important, but then they're similar enough that they look like they all work well together. Type, you want to have some variation, but not too much variation. And this kind of satisfies that requirement. The next thing is I'll turn on my elements here, my visual elements. And at first I had my example of Romar Bearden. And if you hold down the Shift key, you get a proportionate transformation. So I don't want to distort any of my graphics. First of all, I had everything kind of neatly fitted underneath, and I had my other examples that I've referenced in my paragraph. I decided I wanted to have my Romar Bearden collage example larger, but in my text here, I do reference a couple of things that I think were really important in my research. And so I'm going to make these I'm going to make these bold. So the stage glass, which is this picture up here, and then I've got Hiroshige example, which is a Japanese master printmaker from the Edo period. I'm going to turn that in bold. And then the last example I have is, oh, I got to get Hiroshige's first name too, bold. And then I've got an example of Henri Matisse's painting down here, so I'll turn that bold. Oh, there you go. And sometimes when you start editing your text, you can see your columns adjust. So why don't I do 10? And I'm going to make this a little bit wider. Maybe turn that into 25. Maybe I'll take the last line and make it a little bit bigger. So you can see, working with your text columns, they're a little fiddly. And now I need to make sure my rag is really nice. Just pop that up. There we go, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's not a bad column of text. Now, if I turn off my modular grid, it's a pretty uniform layout. So the nice thing about a grid is you can start off and place your elements and get the basic structure of your layout done. And then you're not finished at that point. You could be. But now you can start playing with throwing things off the grid. And for example, what I would do here is I would make this a little larger, and I might make it go right to the edge, and I might bump it up so that there's a nice visual connection between the name of the artist and the collage work that is Romar Bearden's. It's a little more interesting because it's not so perfectly balanced. Balanced layouts are good, but sometimes they're a little boring. I think this works because all of a sudden there's a nice visual connection between the name of the artist and his artwork, and it's a little bit larger, so it feels like there's a connection between the headline and the example artwork. And then these thumbnails a little bit below, kind of grouped together, suggest that they're not as important, and that's what I would like to communicate. And the last thing I have that I would put in there is the information about the artwork, and I could move that over and maybe just line it up with the left edge. And then I can turn off my grid and see what my layout looks like. And there you have it. A simple little layout that has a nicely set column of type and a layout that has an underlying structure, but a couple of little adjustments to make it more visually appealing.